would suicide be an option if people are not happy? Is that if they can't manage life?
When you say suicide, suicide refers to pain.
Hmm.
Okay. And sometimes pain is perceived as not fixable. There is no remedy to them. Okay. Now, pain can exist emotionally, pain can exist intellectually, pain can exist spiritually, can exist physically. If you have stage 4 cancer, I think Dr. Kevorkian was on the right path. Why would you want to refuse your patients a way out? Why would you want to see them be in agony day in and day out? You know, you have a headache, you take a pill. You know, you have a toothache, you go to a dentist and get rid of it. When you realize that you have a disease inside you that's eating you alive and science doesn't yet have a remedy, you know, and if your companion is just pain on a daily basis 24/7, just let the person go. Let them die in dignity. If you have an emotional pain, and if the emotion is so intense, the negative emotion, that you have in your thoughts hints of suicide, for example, taking your own life, the assumption that you have, I'm not saying you in generality speaking, is that this pain that you have is like having a stage 4 cancer. And that's not true. You know, it can be true. It can be true that you may never get healed, that you're just taking up resources. That may be so. It may also be so that you may turn out to be Malcolm X. Like every person who was addicted to alcohol and thought the best way out is suicide, but something happened where they ran into the right person. Maybe they watched the right movie. Maybe they had the right conversation at the right time. Maybe they had the right friend who invited them to the gathering at the right moment in their life. And through the conversation, something about them cracked open and they saw light. And they realized that, well, they can't hang on to this light on their own by themselves. It's going to shut off or turn off quickly if no one is taking care of it. So they stay in the community, okay, until they become addicted to the community and not so much alcohol. You have someone like Robin Williams, you have someone like Socrates, you have someone like Malcolm X, you have someone like Martin Luther, you have someone like Mahatma Gandhi or Jesus Christ. What all these people know is that they're going to die of not natural causes. Someone is going to shoot them. Society doesn't like their message. So society is going to get rid of them. Okay. They lived a very fulfilled life. And when you examine how they died, Martin Luther King Jr. died on a balcony where he was giving a talk. Impassionate speech. Malcolm X died while he was giving a sermon. Mahatma Gandhi died while he was giving a sermon. Socrates died while in prison, where his disciples pleaded with him, "Let us get you out We have bribed the guard. Let's go. Jesus Christ, when he was being tried, all these people committed suicide on a stage where they were full of life. They were inspired. Logos. The Spirit of God lived inside them. Our ways of suicide is very, very, very different. There is no stage upon which we stand. We are not giving a sermon. Our assumption is that our emotions are going to remain dark and gloomy forever. It may be so, but there is also a good chance. It's like all the storms that you see on TV. Uprooting trees, destroying houses, lifting up cars that are 2-3 tons. Eventually the sun comes out. The difficulty with your question, because emotional pain it's no longer an emotional pain, it's just trauma, and it is like an emotional cancer it is remediable. The problem is this: you really need someone to be by your side 24/7 for a long, long, long time. When you've had a traumatic experience in life, what usually happens is you plunge into a very, very solitary life, inwardly speaking. You may have a lot of friends, but inwardly you're close to no one. You're intimate with no one. You don't let anyone get to know your story. And if you do, you're very cautious how much you tell them and what sort of emotions you show them. Okay? Because what you've realized is that people have a tendency, potential to hurt you. And you don't want more hurt. You've had enough of that on your own, inside you. So eventually your addiction is no longer to porn, it's no longer to alcohol, it's no longer to violence. Your addiction is to living a very, very toxic, solitary life, always pushing people away. Now imagine someone walking into your life and they really, really like you. They like who you are. They like things that you yourself can't see, but they like you. You will do to them what you have done to others, which is you'll get close. You will give them the false illusion that you're going to accept them as a companion, as a friend, maybe even a soulmate. You may even bed them, which will further their assumption that this is a bona fide relationship. What they don't know is that these are all traps, and you're setting this up, not consciously. It's something that you've done for a long, long time. You get people close. The moment they become too close, you push them away, and the other person is puzzled. What the heck is going on? And the more they long for you, the more intense, the more fierce you push them away. And you do it for one simple reason. You want to preserve what little good left inside you. You don't want new pain. You want to keep the old pain. Also, when you have lived a solitary life, you lose the ability to have trust, to have faith. You lose the ability to be dependent. It's something we talked about last week. And so you need someone to come into your life, or you need a support system, you know. It's kind of like a rest area, you know, you see on the highway, or hospice or hospital, where you go in there and you have, you know, either professionals or just friends who know exactly what's going on with you. And you keep slapping them and they turn the other cheek. And there comes a point where you just get tired of slapping people. You just give up. And that becomes your moment of salvation. Change slowly begin to take place. It really is a long road. It's doable. And maybe it'll make things easier if you are able to catch yourself when you're doing things to push others away, you know. And there comes a point where you push so many people away, and your hatred and disgust and despair and depression has gone to a stage where there is really no, at least you don't see light at the end of any tunnel. And it's exhausting. You exhaust other people, you exhaust yourself, and then there comes a point where you break. I think if there is severe depression, there is really no need to kind of think about huge remedies or big changes. It has to start with very, very, very small things. I don't know, you just walk around the living room for 10 minutes and then you go back to bed. And the next day you walk about for 20 minutes and then you wash the dishes. You know, and you don't allow those 10 minutes where you walk around to create these illusions that you're all now healed, that you're not going to go back to the old self. You have to be very realistic as well. You know, Lula, the problem with these emotions is that you become the sun and everything revolves around you. Your emotions become the most important things. Your trauma become the most important things. You become extremely selfish and egocentric. You know, if your old life has been shattered and you're moving into a new direction, a new life, you will have a good amount of depression and despair and loneliness. But hopefully it was Socrates who broke your life, and it's Socrates holding your hand and slowly guiding you to a new life. If on the other hand, there was no Socrates breaking you, in other words, it wasn't a guided breaking, something just happened and it was like a shock to your system, and the more you thought about the event, the more emotions inspired, and the more dark it got, to the point where despair and depression was the name of the game. That's all you had. The Persian poet Sa'di, I don't know if he exercised this insight himself or not. I don't even know if he was depressed or not. He said, whenever you feel sad and gloomy, perhaps in today's language, if you feel suicidal, perhaps, you have money, buy yourself a ticket to Ukraine. Seriously. Buy yourself a ticket to Ukraine. Go there. Go to Palestine. Go to India. Don't live in places of privilege. You know, get a place at the very heart of the city. And you realize that, you know, you're working with a mother and a father who have children 2, 3, 4, and 5. And their house was just bombed. And perhaps the kids saw a brother losing a limb. That's a traumatic experience. He wasn't even given a chance to keep his innocence. It was taken away from him at the age of 5. And that's a traumatic experience. And once you begin to live with people who are struggling, are suffering, then you may come to realize, yes, you know, there is a Sufi story that one day a man goes to the star and asked the star, why don't you come out and allow us to see your light, like at 10 in the morning? He says, at 10 in the morning the sun is out. I am far too embarrassed. When the sun is there, who's going to look at me? I am invisible before the sun. I think when you place your physical body in an environment where people are suffering and struggling, you realize you become the star and they are the sun. That despite all the things that may be wrong inside you, there are people who have it far worse. There is only one way to do this. You go to YouTube and you keep searching for images that have come from Ukraine. You keep listening to the speeches given by Zelensky. Not so much Ukraine, any place. It could be Oakland. You don't have to go very far away. You know. You can always find someone who has suffered more than you. But it's the selfishness that kind of blinds you to that. The other thing, I think, which is important is that when you've had a set of emotions that have guided your life for a while, you become addicted to them. Unlike any addiction, it's very, very difficult to overcome. You shouldn't look at depression as a set of emotions that live inside you. Not you again, just in generalities. You're dealing not with emotion, you're dealing with addiction. And you don't need to, go to great length to figure out what to do with this particular addiction. Just listen to the stories of Robin Williams, Al Pacino, maybe even Ben Affleck, or maybe YouTube, some AA groups, their meetings. Addiction is addiction. They're just very difficult to overcome. Some people become addicted to power. Some people become addicted to weakness. If you're powerful, you eventually become a bully and you become addicted to that. And so compassion, humility, empathy are things you most often don't have. If you're weak, your self-image, your self-worth, inspiration, excitement are absent. You're mostly dark and depressed. And it's as difficult to overcome power, the addiction to power, as it is to overcome addiction to weakness. They're both the same. Because addiction gives you meaning, it gives you identity, it gives you purpose, it gives you a reason to be angry. It gives you a reason to create villains, to be mean-spirited, to push people away. I liked Krishnamurti. Every year for about 3-4 months, he would just leave society completely. He would go into a hut. I don't know if he did that, in old age, but he certainly did that when he was young. Because you do get addicted to the stage. You do get addicted to people paying you attention all the time. And something happens to you, something unsavory happens to you when you keep longing for people to applaud you all the time. So he would always take a vacation for a few months into the forest all by himself. And going to a worn-torn place would be a way for someone who's depressed. That would be their hut. They're forced. You can't sit and talk to someone who just lost a son about what happened to you like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's far too embarrassing. You can't just lay in bed and say, today I don't feel like it, where, a bomb just dropped on your head. It doesn't work that way. And if you do, people will scream at you, hit you, beat you up. They'll do all sorts of things to you. I think the more severe one's condition, the harsher the lessons have to be. It's kind of like a kid that you'll say something to them nicely, and the second time it's not as nice, third time it's just really unkind, fourth time it's just harsh, fifth time you just slap, sixth time you just sit on them and then slap. And finally you just say, you know what, I just don't care, whatever. And you don't really want to get to that point where someone looks at you, someone who's had a relationship with you and who's tried various ways to save you from yourself, where they look at you and say, you know what, I just don't care. That's the worst place to be. And in some ways, I think when you've been depressed for a long, long time and have entertained suicidal thoughts, you like that space because it reaffirms that you really have no worth. Life doesn't see you valuable. You don't see yourself valuable. No one sees you valuable. So why live at all? Look, Lula, whenever us Persians gather and we sit and have food and talk, my father talks politics, my brother talks sociology, we have another friend who enjoys continental philosophy. I enjoy, the stuff that I talk about. Because I'm the most animated of them all, what I have a tendency of doing, I will always sabotage the conversations. Ultimately, they will always be geared towards the thing I like. Always. You will do what you possibly can to always get to the end point that you have always enjoyed most in your life, being alone. It doesn't matter who loves you, how much they love you, what they will do for you. None of those things matter. Like me, you will always guide the events to the point that you've been addicted to. For me, it's this type of conversation. For you, pushing people away. That's the way it is. There is a movie you may enjoy. It's called Mona Lisa Smile. It's with Julia Roberts and a few other people whose names I don't know because they're just not important. They're actually very important. So what happens is, there is a young student who doesn't like Julia Roberts as a professor. She's a little unorganized and she's like Socrates, a little wild. She comes from a different social class. She always writes bad things about this professor. She's also about to get married. She also has a friend. This friend has a tendency of sleeping around with various men. She enjoys, she's very open. She respects this force called sex or passion and intimacy and all that. She has no problem with it. So one day this girl from higher social class comes to the room and she's just in a bad mood. And this girl who's open and relatively comfortable with her body comes in. And girl who is from a upper social class begins to say all these nasty things to this other girl. She calls her a whore and all these awful things. And this girl doesn't say anything. There comes a point where the girl who's been abused, been said all these nasty things, comes to this girl from a higher class, gives her a big, juicy hug. It's a beautiful hug. And this girl melts in her arms and she cries and she says, "He doesn't love me." Her husband. "He doesn't love me." And it's a very embarrassing, shameful thing to say, because if you're from that particular social class, you always portray a certain self-image. You're calm, you're cool, you're collected. Nothing in life touches you. You have power over everything. But now she breaks, and she reveals how poor she really is on the inside. The girl who's comfortable with her body has had to endure so much abuse and yet not walk away, and eventually come and give this girl a hug. Rumi has these lines: از محبت گریه خنده می شود. If you're able to give someone a good amount of kindness, their tears will turn into laughter. Thorns will turn into flowers. Jealousy will turn into empathy, all because of compassion, kindness. If someone has been in the business of pushing people away, hopefully they'll meet someone that they will try to push, like Gilgamesh and Enkidu. And that person will remain unmoved. And then, if the person is lucky, a hug will be given to them. And then they'll open up. And there is always the possibility of relapse. Always. Because the new life is going to be, there are a lot of uncertain components. Is he going to stay? Is he going to leave? And every time he looks at another woman, you say, oh my God, I knew it. Some people suicide because the assumption is, if I go somewhere and kill myself, for example, my daughter will miss me, my son will miss me, my wife will miss me, and they'll all feel guilty for not making me dinner, not massaging my feet, not being kinder and nicer to me, and that'll be the way I will revenge. I will balance the equation, But what little I know, Lula, all experiences live in time, and time helps you forget things. I may inspire my wife to cry for maybe a week or 2 or 3. Eventually she'll forget. So it's really not the best way to go. You should just continue living to make people more miserable. And your question really is no different than Allison's question, because it's about will.
Mm-hmm.
How do I will myself out of this? Support system.
Because in a way, we're like will, because we want to do and be better. Well, supposedly, that's what I interpret what will is. You have an idea, you want to make whatever that you want. Like, for example, like just simple thing. You want to wake up and use your day in a in a way that is useful, but not being able to do that, it can come into a depression because you have, this is something you want to do. It's a will, like you think that these are how it's supposed to be, but then you're not doing this thing. Then you kind of start doubting, like, then how am I, like, then you went to the idea of like weakness. It becomes like a weakness. Then how are you then really living life? Because if you're not doing the things that you like, to have the will, like you have like you said, because the will comes and go, but when you have it and it doesn't stay, this idea of like, yeah, just being able to wake up and do the things that you think you should be doing, that you think you should be doing, but you're not doing it. Makes you feel weak. Then your self understanding or whatever kind of gets ruined because of it. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, that's what
You just need people from the outside to push you, that's all. But you have to let them. Lula, let me also just say that these conversations are really, really difficult. In as much as they have a lot of value, I think, they're also quite meaningless and useless. I mean, they're good while we're all here and sitting and talking, it's exciting. There is nothing wrong with that. But their application is enormously difficult, especially when you're driving home and you say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do the things that we talked about last night. And you realize you can't because the environment is not suitable for that. I think we talked about this some time ago, Little House on the Prairie. I don't know if you guys remember that show with Michael London, I think, or something, yeah. So this is like later seasons where they kept adding like characters to the show to just, because it was hemorrhaging. So at this point, the father had a son, and the son had tried drugs. I think it was cocaine or something. And in as much as he wanted to quit, he couldn't. His body, the kid was like 14 or 15. And his father, he went all sorts of different places to find a remedy. And someone finally told him, there is no remedy except give him a little bit of this drug, cocaine. Then he's going to go to sleep. Tie his hands and feet to the bed. Just tie his hands and feet. He's going to scream. He's going to shout. He's going to cry. He's going to say all these nasty things. You're a father. You're going to hear all the stuff. You're going to feel intense emotions where you want to go and untie him, give him a hug, and tell him everything will be okay. Don't do that. It's something that Nietzsche said, that a lot of harm is usually done by people who exercise compassion, the wrong kind of compassion. You know, if your son steals something and he's 5, don't sit and reason with him, just slap him once. That'll be his canon for the rest of his life. But when you kind of just say, it's okay, just a kid. It'll no longer be a candy he'll steal, it'll be a car, he'll rob a house. And so he was standing outside the door, and the acting was done so well. He was screaming and the father was crying. He was screaming and the father was just crying some more. And 3 weeks of this, and he would go in every day and feed him, give him some food, and he would scream and spit the food out, but he would continue, But that is the devotion that a father has to his son. That's how change happens. If you're depressed, it's like you're addicted to cocaine. Someone needs to tie you up, and every time you say, I don't feel like doing this, you get a big slap and a big kick. They are really acts of compassion, the slap and the kick and the cursing and all that. But there comes a point where the parent, where the caretaker just loses it, just gives up and walks away. And it becomes a lose-lose situation for everyone involved. There is a story that comes from Taoism, Lula. It's about this huge boulder just sitting. It's like a big piece of rock or stone. It's like a few 100 tons. So it's gigantic. And there is this drop of water that keeps banging on it every single day. Drop by drop. And one day, another droplet looks at this droplet and says, what are you doing? I'm going to crack this big rock in half. Come on, look at you. You're just a droplet. Look at the size of this rock. Look at the size of you. You will never be able to do it. And the droplet says, I got all the time in the world. I'm very, very patient. Look behind me. There is this huge ocean of water. Don't worry about it. It's fine. And time passes, and little by little, the shape of this rock begins to change. And then eventually, in time, the rock splits in half. And I think it's a great lesson. It's a great lesson about water. It's a great lesson about what it means to be a human being, which is, all of us are dense and stupid. And the teachers are like droplets. They have, I don't know if they have infinite amount of patience, but they have some patience. And they see things that most of us don't see. But a couple of things happen. The rock does not have the power to reject the droplet. It has no choice but have the droplet fall on it, bang on it. The rock would never split in half. It had the power to kind of create a shield where the droplet would fall on the shingle and then roll off, So it's true that the water falls, but it must also be so that the rock receives the water. It's not enough that the water falls. It needs to fall on the right things at the right time for a long, long time.